Hi, guys. Welcome to No Culty Vibes. I'm your host, Cassie Marie, a former cult hopper, artist, and content creator. And today I have a very, very special episode for you, a very intense episode. I am talking to my now friend, Amanda, about her experience with YWAM. If you don't know what YWAM is, it stands for Youth with a Mission, and it's a missionary organization that operates across bases all over the entire world. I have some episodes on my podcast, No Culty Vibes. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, where I go a little bit more in depth on the structure of YWAM, how it was founded, where it came from, and some of the more culty aspects of it. I do feel like YWAM is a full-blown harmful cult that not a lot of people are talking about, except for the people that are just trying to share their stories to give informed consent to those who are looking to maybe participate in YWAM. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in this episode today. But Amanda and I connected. I believe she either was referred to me by a friend or heard one of my YWAM podcast episodes. And either way, maybe she just found me on TikTok. I'm not sure. Either way, we connected on Instagram and she shared a lot of information about YWAM with me and began sharing her experience and decided that it was time for her to reclaim her story and she wanted to come on and share her experience with you all. This story is going to be a tough one. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to give all the trigger warnings in a minute. And it's taken a lot for Amanda to be able to share this with us. And she is sharing a very unique experience with YWAM's NIKO bases or NIKO camps. There are a couple that exist in the world. And this is something that I had not heard of very much at all before Amanda told me about it. But from what I've gathered, from what Amanda has told me, and from what I've been able to research about this, NIKO experiences are some of the worst in YWAM. And YWAM has had some pretty horrendous, pretty awful things happen. Amanda is also a therapist and has spent a lot of time healing through what she experienced. So this conversation was really nice and fun to have with someone where it was done through kind of a therapeutic lens in a way. Amanda doesn't analyze her experience through therapy, but I think just having some of that insight to apply to YWAM as a whole was really amazing and really helpful. Amanda was so kind with her time and shared basically her entire YWAM story with me, even though this was kind of the highlights of her experience, not highlights in a good way, just the main points. We did spend a very long time talking to each other. So I have split this episode up into two parts. The first part is going to be Amanda talking about what led up to YWAM and her YWAM experience before NIKO, and then what happened when she was done with NIKO, went back to her original base, and then went home, and what her experience was like at home and what her healing journey was like. And then part 2 is going to be her entire NIKO experience from start to finish. Before we get started and get into the trigger warning so you can decide if you are in the headspace to listen to this episode, I did want to let you guys know that I have a little website where I have made some of my digital art available for purchase. I actually have 2 coloring pages on there right now that you can check out. They're a little cheeky and funny. But coloring is a great kind of like meditative practice. It can really help with anxiety. So be sure to check those out. The link is in the description below. I have some No Culty Vibes digital art pieces available, and there will be more to come. And my original work, like the one right behind me here, is going to be available very shortly as well. So I would appreciate any and all of you, if you're interested, to check it out and let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear feedback, and I'm so excited to share more of what I'm working on when it comes to art and art as a healing practice. Okay, so you're about to listen to part 1 of Amanda's YWAM story, and I'm going to give you a very big trigger warning for spiritual abuse, suicidal ideation. There are some mentions of animals and animal violence in both of these episodes. and just general difficult, horrifying, undue influence, coercive control content. So please keep that in mind. Tread lightly, take breaks when you listen, skip these episodes altogether. If it's too hard for you, we will be here with other episodes whenever you choose. You know what's best for you. So, again, please take care while listening. Amanda, so Amanda and I connected. Do you go by Amanda or Mandy?
Okay, that's a weird even way to start. So in my professional world, I mainly go by Amanda. When I was in YWAM, I went by Amanda. My closest friends and closest family and people that love me most call me Joe. So if you hear me refer to myself as Joe when I talk about myself, it's because I refer to myself as Joe, but the professional world refers to me as Amanda. So you can choose what you want to call me today.
Okay, we'll start with Amanda, and if we get into Joe territory, that's just where it goes.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Perfect. So tell me a little bit about how you heard about YWAM and what led up to you ending up with YWAM and which YWAM were you with?
Yeah. So YWAM wasn't this like odd thing within my community. I grew up heavily involved within the church, actually the Christian Reformed Church, which is a little bit ironic that I ended up in something like YWAM because YWAM is super like evangelical. The CRC church is not. But so I grew up in the CRC church within a religious family, very religious context around my community, kind of only when I grew up mainly only hung out with people that were within either the CRC church or within a Christian bubble, because I went to a Christian school as well. And so ended up in YWAM because YWAM was a well-known thing. They talked about it in our church. There was missionaries in our church that were serving abroad in YWAM that would come back and talk and try to raise money. They would come to school events and speak at school events at our Christian school and encourage people to go abroad after school. And they labeled it as a gap year program. So kind of like the perfect thing to do in between spending thousands of dollars at a private Christian university. I'm being a little bit facetious and sarcastic, but let's first spend thousands of dollars at a gap year program. And then we'll see where we go. And so that's kind of where and how I landed there. I was in grade 12. I was a decent basketball player, had planned to go play somewhere in the States, and then had a really bad back injury and wasn't able to go play where I was expected to play and was not going to have a position on the floor that year because of my back. And so I thought, oh, what a great option. I'll just take a gap year, go do what everyone tells me to do, go work in my faith and go learn more about Jesus and be a missionary for 5 months. And then maybe I can find a way to play basketball in the university after. And so, I was really involved in music and I like to sing and worship lead at that time. And so YWAM Denver had a musicians track of a DTS. And so that's where I found and Googled musicians DTS and landed in Denver, Colorado at their Arvada base.
Wow. I am always surprised at the other faith traditions that end up in YWAM because YWAM is so evangelical and so charismatic. And when I researched the roots, it's Pentecostal. It's very charismatic Pentecostal, but many of the people that I talk to that share their YWAM stories are from very run of the mill. I know Reformed, I'm sure we could talk a lot about different things about Reformed theology, but it's not that charismatic evangelical, very over the top belief system.
No. Not even remotely.
Yeah. So you found the music program and went to Denver. Mm-hmm. What were you expecting going into a DTS?
It's so interesting. I wasn't even quite sure what I was expecting. I was expecting maybe this, I don't know, Jesus-y, fun, loving community of people that all were kind of on the same track and kind of like a schooling type ordeal. more like a university feel, I think I was expecting. I'd done campus visitations. And so when they said base, I guess I was imagining more of a university feel and maybe like a dorm room. Um, but more just so like really what I expected also was the musicians track. So the aspect of like, oh, they broadcasted as a thing of like, we'll get to record music. We get to be in like bands. You get to like write music and be all this like musician stuff. And so I really expected as well, like, oh my word, I'm gonna get to like record songs for the first time. I'm gonna get to like be on a band. I'm gonna get to like maybe see where that goes. Like it was very like and as someone like me at that moment who my whole life was basketball, then all of a sudden that was stripped away. It was like, well, I do know how to sing and I have worship led in massive groups in front of hundreds of people. I know that skill. I like that skill. I've, been a pastor, like I've been a children's pastor, youth pastor at a church. So it was like, I can put this in then. If I can't do basketball, God obviously wants me to do worship and music. And so was really expecting that piece. I kind of in my heart was like, I'm the next like, Hillsong, like music artist
Yeah.
that's coming out. Like that's what we're going to be. Yeah, wasn't that.
It wasn't that. So I've
No.
heard varying stories about what it's like to first show up at the YWAM base. So what was your initial experience like when you got there?
Yeah, first of all, it's like I didn't realize, funny enough, so it's like Denver, Colorado is where YWAM is. So I'm expecting like I'm expecting to be in the heart of Denver and like musicians, heart of Denver, this is gonna be cool. And they say that someone will pick me up. And so I don't, it's so crazy. This is such a traumatic time. There's so many bits and pieces that are missing and fragmented. But
Yeah.
someone picked me up who ended up being my small group leader, but I didn't know that at the time, which is a whole nother ordeal. And was my one-on-one. But so she somehow I got in her car and we're driving back. And I remember it was a long drive. And I remember asking, like, where are we going?
Oh
And actually, I
no.
remember the second getting in her car, actually feeling like, what the fuck am I doing? Sorry, I don't need
Oh,
to,
you
I'm
can
sorry for language.
absolutely. We
Okay.
can drop the
Yeah.
F-bombs. No
Okay.
worries.
But yeah, like, what am I doing? What am I doing in this
Yeah.
person's car that I do not know? And I actually don't know where I'm going. So
Yeah.
hopping in the car, driving and just talking. And I remember just feeling so uncomfortable the whole time and realizing we're not driving just like Denver City. We're going somewhere else. So I asked, like, are we like in Denver? They're like, well, no, we're in like the suburbs. We're like in like kind of like a city called Arvada. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm thinking I'm like gonna, be close to Denver forever. It's like an hour drive into the city of Denver.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and so then we get to the base, and the moment I got to the base, and now I know this to be wild, like intuition and hypersensitivity, but I knew something
Yeah.
wasn't right. Like the second we pulled in, it was like, what is this? And then bringing me up to my bedroom and me being like, you're telling me I'm in a room with 8 girls? Like, what? A bunk bed? Just, and oh my word, like there was printout on our bed of the rules at the base. And so right away it was like, oh, no secular music? Oh my God. Okay. I can't ever play that out loud or listen to it. Oh my word. And so all these pieces. And I remember just actually like shaking in my bunk, putting pictures up on my
Wow.
wall, being like, what am I doing here?
Well, I
Yeah.
would assume like I've seen YWAM like advertising and like what they promote as a DTS, and I would assume that like you would be going into something that you think is like very official, right? Like you're probably expecting to like go to like an organization and like a very like
Yes.
official thing. And so to be like picked up by a random person that you didn't know at the airport and then driven outside of Denver when you're expecting to go to Denver, I would assume would be very jarring, like right off the bat.
Yeah. And it was so scary. And I think too, it's like, and I can't remember, it's like, did I read somewhere that where it was in Arvada? Probably online, but did I connect when they say YWAM Denver? No 18-year-old connects to that being
No.
like, what's Arvada? I don't know what Arvada is. I'm like, oh, like what is that a nickname for their base? Like, so I think that's the thing too. It's like, you just, you look at, like, if you were to Google YWAM Denver's website, it's beautiful. It looks like this, like,
Mhm.
I don't know, this really prestigious, like, thing that you're headed to. And it's not.
It
it's
is not.
it is not that.
Yeah. So you got there. There were rules like immediately of like things that are
Yes.
allowed and not allowed that you didn't know ahead of time.
Yes.
And then did you have like an initial, did they do any kind of like orientation or like initial meeting or anything with you?
Yeah. So it's so interesting because it's like, I remember too, one of the very first things realizing, I can't remember if I read this or if we were told this immediately, but I wore to base a pair of leggings. Like, I'm traveling from Vancouver, BC. So
Hmm.
I'm wearing just like a pair of Lululemon leggings, which is regular. I'm a freaking athlete. Like, that's what I live in. I don't even think like, what's jeans, honestly, at that time of my life. And I remember finding out, first of all, within like the first 10 minutes that I couldn't wear those. And that half my wardrobe was gone. I was like, what am I supposed to like?
Oh
What am I supposed to
no.
do? So that was the first like rule that I think was spoken to me. I don't think it was written yet. But yeah, and then again, spotty details. We for sure had orientation. So you wait till
Yeah.
everyone gets there. And there's like definite orientation. But more than orientation, it's this like weird freaking difficulty culty night that I think is the second night we're there, the first night, where we like get put into like, yeah, our small groups, and there's like this massive worship night, and you've got to pretty much like tell all your worst secrets and sins to the entire group, and then you have to decide to commit and to say you're moving forward, which I remember being just terrified. I'm like, what am I committing to? Why am
Mm.
I? And then to commit, you have to allow your leader to wash your feet. And I was like, if you think I'm going to let some strange woman that I don't know touch my feet in a bowl of water after telling her all my worst secrets, you've got something coming. Like,
Not
but
the feet,
I
Amanda.
did it. I did it because you
Well,
have to.
yeah,
You did, right? It's
yeah.
like, but what in the,
What else are you gonna do?
and
Yeah.
I think
So that
like,
was like
this
one of
is,
the first nights,
yeah, I think the second night, that's when we did the big, or the first
worship
night.
and confession. It
Yeah,
was early
massive.
enough, like one of the first things
Oh,
you remember.
first night or second night. Yeah, it was very
Yeah.
soon in. And I think in this sense too, this is where like where it comes up, where I feel in my system like this interesting dichotomy of like fury and massive grief, because it's like those
Mhm.
same people that were in the room with me, that I had to be in this woman's small group, but then she had to be my one-on-one and my leader and my like, I don't know, freaking babysitter for 5 months. She was in the same position as me a year earlier. She was traumatized and
Right.
wounded in the exact same way I was. Um, and so that's a piece that even as I tell my story, I sit with, is it's like, yeah, there's lots of rage, and I'm not even sure where the rage lands yet. It for sure lands at the higher up. Lauren
Right.
Cunningham, absolutely.
Yeah.
The base leaders of YWAM Denver, like Peter and Linda Warren, that were there when I was there, absolutely. I don't actually like have a ton of grace in that space yet, maybe, and maybe that will come one day. But for most of these other people that were doing these things to me or making me do these things at YWAM, they were literally just me a year or 2 years advanced. They were little babies as well. And their what they felt was their livelihood also depended on continuing these things. And so
Right. I
I
know
feel grief for every single person in that room.
I know. I've read that like from some other people's stories that often the people who come back the next year after DTS and do some kind of leadership like that usually are very pressured into doing so. Like it's usually like a
100%.
they tend to be very vulnerable and have either been convinced that they don't have anything else waiting for them back home or feel as though they
Yes.
don't in some way and are
Hmm.
generally very pressured to come back into a real leadership position after they've
Oh,
gone, like you
yeah.
said, through the same trauma and haven't even like had the time to like unpack what they've gone through. And then they're back in it and
Exactly.
trying to like lead other people through what they don't even realize like happened to them yet. And I would imagine that that's another layer of like being extra traumatizing.
Yeah, right. Because it's just a bunch of dissociated, traumatized nervous systems
Mm-hmm.
in fight or flight, trying to stuff down what they've experienced so they can move ahead and continue. And so they're not even most of the time cognitively present in their bodies as they're inflicting trauma on these other people because they're just as dysregulated and
Right.
just as traumatized as those students who are being traumatized and dysregulated in that moment. And so it's
Yeah.
all just a vortex of trauma, dysregulation, and wounding each other.
It's so sad. I love that you became a therapist and we can talk about the story from a therapy angle
Yeah,
because I feel
I
like
even forget.
sometimes it's
I was like, oh yeah,
helpful.
I guess. Yeah,
It's
my
kind
brain
of
always is
helpful to have
like,
that perspective to look back on, like as we're telling the story. So
yeah.
you arrived and immediately it was jarring and traumatizing and very weird and uncomfortable. Did you then feel like you got into a groove where you were like, oh, okay, like this is what we're doing, this is what we're learning? Did you do any music in the way that you thought you were
Mm.
going to? Or did it just go downhill
So
from
yeah, I will say absolutely dumpster fire downhill from there, but more so in my brain, less so on the outside. So
there?
I, for the
Okay.
first bit, concealed what was going on. I like, or like my, like, what the fuck is going on? But I will say the first piece is that no music was ever done. I never recorded a song. The only thing did do is was forced to lead like 8 hours of worship in a 24-hour worship night where we couldn't sleep or do anything. Um,
Oh
but
my
otherwise,
God.
and a few times I got to lead worship like on the big worship base things, but not really. That was only if you were really staff and you were like the special chosen ones did you get to lead the whole
Hmm.
base in worship, because that's a big deal, and you can't just let
Yeah.
anyone lead a base in worship. I'm having sarcasm again. But there was
No,
nothing
you're
like
good.
that.
Yeah.
We didn't get to like do anything really musical. And it was like there was times where like yeah, you got to go if you we were allowed to like have the space, the music area where we did worship and like use instruments and hang out there if we wanted at times. There was a lot of musically inclined people there, so everyone was whipping out their like guitars and singing "Set a Fire" down in my soul 24/7 around circles on benches. But like no, it
Yeah.
wasn't like that. And so I immediately started like, I mean, I, I'll say this now. So I can talk a little bit candidly about my trauma because I have safe spaces where I feel and experience emotion as I talk about my trauma, which is really important,
Mhm.
and to have that safety. But here to let my body go into this like insanely traumatized space for like a podcast isn't actually helpful for my system. And so I just want to name to people as well that as I talk about these things, it might sound like I have a bit of a flat affect, but it's my way of compartmentalizing, actually, just to keep my nervous system grounded.
Yeah,
But
that makes so
right
much
away, I started
sense.
to, yeah, does that, yeah, is that, yeah, I hope that lands for people.
I think that'll be helpful
um,
too, because I know that a lot of people who listen have experienced similar things and may or may not have told their stories
yeah,
before. And so I think it's helpful to hear that, like, there's a very specific reason for this, and it's not that you're not feeling
yeah,
emotion while talking.
totally. And I think I've gone back and forth kind of like, do I really feel through this interview? And although there'll be parts probably that will have some big emotion attached, even maybe when we go talk about my outreach and what happened there, that although that might come up, that for me in this moment, yeah, it's just most safe to me to talk about it. But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that for all other people listening to my story, that there should be no emotion involved in this trauma. What I'm
Right.
talking about is horrific trauma. And so I
Yeah.
hope that, yeah, when people listen, they're affirmed and not disorientated by my flat affect, if that, yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Yes.
what I was going to say is as soon as I like day two, I started getting, it's the first time in my life that I started throwing up because of anxiety. And so I woke up every morning and the people, they started learning, like the students. Oh, you're just frozen a minute. Are you able to hear me?
Oh, sorry. I can hear
Oh, no,
you.
you're good. Perfect. Just want to make sure that
Okay.
you're present.
Yeah.
That we didn't lose you.
Yeah.
But yeah, my base students that lived in my room with me, they knew in the morning that the second that Amanda stirred, like, get out of the way, she's going straight to the bathroom. Because
Wow.
I had so much terror in my body every day that I would throw up, and then I couldn't eat. And then if I did eat, I
Mhm.
would throw up again. And I lost 35 pounds in 3.5 months.
Oh,
Um, yeah. And
that's
it wasn't it was at that point it wasn't an eating disorder behavior. It's actually just a massive trauma response. And so that continued really early on. Um, some really dark spots where I actually sought help because I was really not okay. Um, and was given the whole kind of, they painted my mental health in a spiritual way of saying that, like, mental illness actually doesn't really exist. It's our inability to confess sins from, like, deep within us. And
right.
if we actually trust God and we like, yeah, repent of what those sins are, that mental illness will leave us. And so it was pretty much told to me that I was choosing to be so not okay because I was refusing to repent of a sin that I wasn't telling anyone about. And which was really messed up for my system.
That makes me so mad because
Yeah,
that's common in a lot of these culty churches of this faith tradition, and but it's also
yeah,
common in all different cults across the board.
mm,
Most cults
100%.
have some kind of version of victim blaming, victim shaming, misunderstanding of mental health, where like
Yes,
you don't, it's not something you need therapy for. It's not something you need medication for. It's something that you need to use our beliefs and our system to fix. And
yes,
if our beliefs and
yeah,
our system is not fixing you, then you're the problem. Like it's not us, it's not our belief, it's you. So there must be some
exactly.
sin that you're not disclosing, that you're lying about, because
Yeah.
our belief and our system works 100% of the time, which is just not even real. That's not a thing.
And I think for you to put that so into words right now, so like matter of factly, is my whole body just went because that's exactly it. Like you explained
Yeah,
it so well. And it's so affirming actually for you to put words into that for me. Because you didn't experience my experience, but what you just
right.
explained was my experience. And so it's like, oh, yeah, which is so, so sad, right?
It is.
Like it's,
And it's
I think,
weird,
in,
right? It's weird that
yes,
these systems are so similar, even if like Scientology doesn't believe in any spiritual anything. They believe in technology and L. Ron Hubbard's words, whereas
yes,
like YWAM believes in God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and like absolute divine guidance and intervention. And those two things are so very different, and yet the system
yeah,
is the same. And the experience is still that you can't trust yourself and something's wrong with you and
exactly.
you're the problem.
Yes. And in order to be fixed, it requires complete obedience from someone that's higher up than you,
Yep.
right? I
Yeah.
think that's also the trapping piece, I think, for me was in this moment of time, while I'm taught that obviously suicide, which I want to be gentle as I talk about this because I think this is a far too real thing for a lot of us at YWAM. But they preach and they believe that suicide is like an ultimate sin, right? And so if you kill yourself, you take away, um, choice and you are disobeying God. And so that is instant to hell. And so there actually was no out for anyone in that place of like being so stuck and unwell.
Right.
And that was which adds even more trauma because not even suicide is an option in those spaces
Right.
because suicide is ultimate disobedience to God, which is straight to hell. And so you are stuck in a place where actually your intuition, your God given intuition that connects you to your core and your wisdom is telling you something so wrong. And that's what's creating such a massive reaction in the body that looks like mental,
Right.
like, mental illness or mental health issues. And then when you go to seek help for that, they say there is no help we can give you. And if you give up, you will be sent to hell, have no community, no connection, no love, no support, no co regulation, no attunement for life.
Your
And so
entire, your eternity is at stake.
so
Your
you're at
eternity
hell on
will
earth.
be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at hell on earth. And the other option is hell outside of earth.
Yeah. Right.
So imagine the cortisol getting pumped into all of these children's nervous systems who are starting to experience panic in a place that they feel unsafe, knowing that they
Mm-hmm.
cannot leave. And if they did leave, they're burning for hell, for life, right? It's such
Right.
a dark thing to imagine.
Did you experience YWAM leaders trying to distance you from friends and family as well?
Oh,
Did you ever ask, like, I think I just want to go home, or maybe I should talk to someone else about it, or whatever? Was that ever a thought? And did they try to demonize like your community that you would have had if
oh,
you felt like,
absolutely. Yeah, that was such a dark spot, right? It's like I wanted to go home within the first week. So that was the first battle at YWAM actually. Is I wanted to go. I was not okay. And I was like, this isn't, something's wrong. Um,
mm-hmm,
I was like hyper independent Joe. Like I was the type of kid that like at home, never was home in the evenings, was like going to friends' houses all the time, sleepovers, like see you later, family. I didn't have homesickness, okay, as a teenager. As a kid, yes. Teenager, no. And then I show up here and I start, yeah, throwing up all the time, panicking. I like at this point, I didn't even have a good relationship with my parents. I love and adore my parents. But at that time, it wasn't like I was the teenager that was laying on my mom's bed and telling her all about my life. We didn't
right,
talk in that way. But all of a sudden I get to YM and I'm like, I need my mom and I need my dad. And I start like calling them all the time. And I remember a distinct morning where they're at home on the couch and I'm FaceTiming them and I'm not well. Like I had never been so unwell in my life. I can't even speak to them. I'm weeping so much. And oh no, this is sorry. The first time, not on a Sunday morning. The first time it's an evening,
mm-hmm,
and I'm talking to them at 10 o'clock because I can't sleep. I know what I was having as a panic attack. Didn't have that language at the time. And I get out of my bed, go to the hallway because I don't want to wake up my whole room, and I call my mom. And then my dad gets on, and I am hyperventilating and a staff member comes down the hallway to do bed
mm-hmm,
checks, by the way, which I didn't know bed checks were a thing because you weren't allowed to have your phone on after a certain time and we're supposed to have to be in your bed lights out at a certain time. And this person comes and tells me I'm not allowed to be talking to my parents after 10 o'clock and that I'm not allowed to be in the hallway and then I need to go into my bunk and stood there at the computer until I said goodbye. Um, and I remember just going to my bunk like, what am I supposed to do? I can't breathe. I can't wake up this
mm-hmm.
whole room. I need my mom. My mom and dad are sitting there wanting to talk to me. And a similar thing happened on a Sunday where I was so unwell and my whole family was FaceTiming me like a few days later and they're ready to go to church and I'm calling them. And same thing. It was a day that we were allowed to be calling. There was no time limit on like what time I could have been calling my family at the time. And still a base leader was like, this isn't helpful for you. You're not going to like move forward with the Lord here if you keep trying to be so involved in your life like back at home. And it became this thing. And they also hung over your head, right? When anyone was like, I want to go home, it's like, no, you fundraised for this. Like people gave money. Are you just going to go back to your community and be like, no, because of your own like worldliness or distrust or disobedience, you just like decide to go home and live a different life? Like that's not serving the Lord. That's not being a servant. Like God
Yeah.
called you here. Also, you committed on the first night when when that leader washed your feet,
Oh
you
no.
committed to never leaving. And so those pieces too are really big. And like, this is how we obey God. God, like things are hard. Christianity's not easy. You gotta like dig in.
Right.
And so a lot of like,
And like suffer like Jesus. Like Jesus,
yeah.
I've heard from other YWAM people, it was like Jesus suffered way worse than this. So like your suffering will never compare to
Oh, and
Jesus's suffering on the cross.
that
So
was
like
my whole
yours
camp in the
fought.
wilderness. Yeah. That's like, exactly. It's like everywhere. I remember too, I was at that point I did want to still go to university after, and I wanted to play basketball. So I was still talking with coaches, trying to send my like footage. I still wanted to stay with my athlete, like be an athlete still. So they had a basketball hoop there, and I was always playing outside. And I remember multiple times having very serious conversations with staff who called me out and was like, this is like, how do you know this is God's plan for you? You shouldn't be applying to university yet. Like, you don't know what's next. How do you know God's not going to call you back here? Like, basketball will take up your entire life if you play like at a university varsity level. Like, where's your relationship with God going to be then? You shouldn't be spending your time at YWAM trying to plan things in the future. That's like not being open to the Holy Spirit. And I'm going like, what? Like, that was even like weird to me. But then you start gaslighting yourself and you start feeling guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I am sinning by wanting to go play varsity sports. Like, maybe I shouldn't be going to university after this. Maybe this is the
Right.
wrong thing, right? Like, you don't know.
Yeah. Well, and you're just a kid and you're there looking to
Yeah.
leadership because you're supposed to be learning from them. So then you're like, oh,
Yes.
well, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I am being disobedient, or maybe I do just need to suffer through it. It's really hard
Totally.
once you're there and once I mean, it's systematic. Like you're
It's,
telling your stories, but
mm-hmm.
you're doing a great job at showing how it's all of these little things that build
Oh,
up and build
yeah.
up. So by the time
Mm-hmm.
you're really like, I don't think I want to do this, there's been so many little things that have like gotten in to make you
Oh,
question.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
And and I think that's the things there's lots of macro big things, but lots of them are micro, right? And they're just
Right.
it's like a typical abuser, right? It's like
Mhm.
when you pull back, it's often I read so much on like different threads about YWAM trauma and Reddit and stuff, and people are always like, I have such a hard time nailing down all of the concrete massive things. And I'm like,
Right.
because there's a million micro things that go into every one of those macro pieces, right? And I think
Right.
that's what abuse happens, right? You small little
Yeah.
itty bitty pieces so that no one ends up noticing.
Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about like what led to your outreach and where you went on
Hmm.
outreach? Because for people who don't know, YWAM, when you sign up for DTS,
Yes,
and you can help remind me,
totally.
you go for a year, right? And the first 6 months
Hmm.
are you're learning, like
You go,
doing.
typically it's 3 months and
Oh, okay.
then is your learning, and then 2 months is the outreach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you where did you decide to go to outreach? Was your base one
Yeah.
of the bases that let you decide, or were you told where to go? And tell us a little bit about
Yeah. So also I want to acknowledge that sometimes there's so many YWAMs in the world. So there are
that.
different
Right.
ones. Like, I had friends some of my friends that were at YWAM at my time were in a different track, and they did only a 2 month time on base, and they were gone for like 3.5 months on outreach. And some
Okay.
people do longer ones. So there's lots of different training schools and programs as well outside of the DTS that are longer or more extensive. So not everyone's experience is the exact same. But yeah, mine was 3 months in Denver. And then for outreach, I got to I got to choose. So everything at YWAM is a choice, right? Um,
Right.
Everything is you choosing. That's which that's a whole nother thing, because to choose something or to agree to something or to consent to something, you need to know what you're agreeing to, what you're consenting to,
Mhm.
what you're committing to. Otherwise, you can't do that, right? Like last night, and was up late looking at all the different like legal terminology, even around like agreements and commitment
Yeah.
and autonomy and all these different pieces. And what a choice is and what a choice
Yeah.
is not. And so yes, we in theory got to choose our outreach. There was two options. So it was interesting because there was a DTS with us at the same time. They were the around the world DTS. So that's the one that they were there only
Oh,
with us for 2 months. And then they did like 8 countries in 3.5 months. So they were gone for much longer than us. So they chose that ahead of time. That one was actually way more expensive because they went to a million countries and whatever.
right.
um, but for us, we had two options, and so they finally like presented to us what the options were. One was Costa Rica, And then the other one was Thailand, I think, if I am correct. The Thailand team was a married couple whom I actually love deeply. Um, and the other outreach was in Costa Rica was a male. I can't remember his age. Probably like in my brain, he was like in his 40s, but he's not. He's definitely not because I no, he's at that time. I think he was probably mid 20s.
Yeah.
There or early 20s actually. And then they were going to bring a second leader on, depending on that one, depending how many students were there. And so, although it was a choice, it's not really a choice. It's like the day that people have to decide their outreach, you're like in this massive like worshipy, preachy big event, and everyone else that isn't going on outreach is around you, and they're getting words from the Lord and telling you where God's telling them that you should be going. And
Right.
then like you're supposed to get words from the Lord, but like if more people give you a word from the Lord that affirms this place and your word from the Lord doesn't affirm that, well, you got to go with what the pack is affirming. Cause like, what does the
Right.
actual outreach leader think? Because they're hearing from God more superior than anyone else. And also you're not allowed to like, there's all these weird things of YWAM is always trying to split up friend groups and people that get along well. So
Yeah.
within like the first like 2 weeks, I was in trouble because I had made two really good friends, and so we were no longer allowed to hang out, just the three of us anymore. And you always had to bring a fourth person in, and we got in trouble because we had a group chat, and that's unfair. You can't be talking with three people. Like, what? I can't make friends. I'm sorry. Which is, of
Mhm.
course, an occult abusive aspect. But so you weren't
Yep.
allowed to like know who was choosing what, because that would be a nightmare. And so I made my choice. I chose Costa Rica, and that was the wrong choice. So
No.
I spent probably a week. Um, and I want to be gentle when I say this because, again, those humans that pressured me back and forth in my choice were the same people as me, just little babies that were so wounded and traumatized and so harmed, and were just as confused about whether they were hearing from God or not and what was going
Right.
on. And so I actually don't have any anger towards these people.
Mhm.
But I was that was like the most insane week of my life. It was like back and forth, deciding one of them was way more money. But then when I said I don't want to go on that one because it's way more money, then I was like, well, you're not being
You're
obedient.
not
Like you
trusting
can,
the Lord with your
exactly trust the
finances and
Lord.
that He will
Why are you just
provide.
why are you just choosing the cheapest outreach, right? Then it was like,
Yeah.
you've already gone to a lot of like South American countries and Central America countries. Like, you need to try something new. You've never let the Lord lead you to Thailand. And then it was the whole like, you're like Jonah and the whale. You're going to get to Costa Rica and like, God's gonna friggin' like rip you out of there
Like,
if you
why
don't,
did
which
you
again,
not
having
go?
those
Yeah.
ideas in my head as I go to Costa Rica, then every fucked up thing that happened to me in Costa Rica, I was like, of course that's why it's happening,
Yeah.
because I chose the wrong outreach. I didn't obey God. I should have listened. I am just like Jonah. I do deserve to be in the belly of the whale, in
Yep.
the metaphor of the story. And so, yeah, I did end up in that battle of back and forth, choose Costa Rica. Um, but everyone was furious that I made
Oh
the wrong choice
no.
and that I wasn't obeying God.
Oh gosh.
And somehow I stuck with it. I don't really know how I did, but I was like, yeah, Joey's going to Costa Rica, whether you like it or not, buddies.
You
I sh-
probably were like, no, this is the hill I'm gonna die on.
for
Every
some
choice
reason
is
it
gonna ripped
was.
away from me. This
Yes,
one's mine.
this one is mine. I'm going. Yeah.
Ugh. So you go. You go to Costa
Yes.
Rica. What? And I also just want to say that when I first heard about YWAM, before I started uncovering this, because YWAM was well known
Mm-hmm.
in my church circles. I've had friends that have done the world race. Like, I knew what these mission trips were like. But when
Mm-hmm.
I think of a missions trip, like YWAM to me, youth with a mission. Like, you're supposed to go on missions trips. And missions trips to me should be helping people. And now I've deconstructed a lot of that and I understand the problems with short-term
Mm-hmm.
missions and that they end up not being helpful. But like, you would
Yeah.
think like, I'm going to house the homeless or feed the poor or evangelize to people who have never heard of God before. Again, things that I find all very problematic because that's no
Hmm.
one should feel bad about feeding people that need to be fed or housing the homeless, but it's done in ways that tend to be very harmful. However, Costa Rica, were you even doing any of those things?
Yeah, great question. So that's the crazy piece is that again, I have so much love, probably still some trauma and stuff to work through with, people that led us on that outreach and the choices that were made. But our outreach leader was probably one of the he was ready to leave. Okay, he had already said I'm out of YWAM Denver was starting to tank. And it was starting to tank
Wow.
massively. Actually, some big things were coming out, and people were starting to be like, "I got to get the heck out of here." Even some of the most connected people, and so he was already by the time he was leading our outreach, he was like, I'm done. Like as soon as we're done this outreach, I'm quitting YWAM anyway. I'm passive. I don't really care. And
Yeah.
so when we kept kind of asking, what's the plan and why, and what's the plan when, I mean, in Costa Rica, when we get there, what are we all doing? What are we prepping for? Because oh, sorry, it's not funny, but it's funny to imagine me in the basement doing this. We have to practice all these stupid skits and dances and mimes to these horrible songs where you have to someone's in a white shirt and they're Jesus and everyone else is the demons and you're acting out these insane scenes so that you can go in the Costa Rican city and do a mime and that will convert
Oh
people.
no.
Tell me more. So we practiced those for months. I actually wanted to rip my hair out, but man, sometimes I'm wondering I wonder one day if that muscle memory will come back and I'll be able just to move in the angelic way as I come and save Jesus in my
Do your
mind act from
interpretive Holy
YWAM.
Spirit inspired but very
Yeah,
heavily rehearsed.
totally. And at this point, though, I was like, fuck this. I'm not going to Costa Rica to do some dances in the street, but I will learn them because otherwise I'm going to get in trouble at YWAM. So when we got
Yeah.
but, and I did actually do dances on the streets. I'll tell you that much on a basketball course by the ocean. And a bunch of literally locals were just standing there smoking weed, being like, what is
Interesting.
going on? Well, a bunch of other white Europeans were in bathing suits swimming with their children. It was hilarious.
They
But
probably were like, what strain is this? Where did
literally,
this weed come from? This
they were
can't be
like, is
real.
that a group of white people taking mushrooms? That man, I'll get in on this shit. This
Yeah,
is interesting. Yeah, we probably just converted the whole town to taking psilocybin that night when they actually thought we were
probably.
when we were actually trying to get them to be Christians. Um, but regardless, yeah. So the whole time we're asking, what are we doing? What are we doing? He's like, oh, it doesn't matter. You guys will go find out when we get there. And it doesn't matter, you'll find it when we get there. Which, for me, anxiety, panic, I need to know what's going on, what we're doing. That's me. And I've now learned why I'm like that and why I need so much structure, but didn't know that at the time. Um, and we got off the plane in Costa Rica then finally, still not knowing what we're doing. And he has no plans at this point. He has a few contacts in Costa Rica of things that we could maybe do and help out. He's got an anti-sex trafficking organization. We could possibly go work in the red light district of Costa Rica, a bunch of 18-year-olds in
Because
the
that
red
sounds
light district. Yeah, that's brilliant.
that's
With some of
I've
the
heard
most,
stories of that being an outreach. Like I've
yeah,
had some people that have disclosed to me behind the
horrors.
scenes in a couple red light districts in Europe that it was common for YWAM 18-year-olds to go there by
That was,
themselves
yeah,
or
that was
with
Costa
one buddy
Rica.
because
Yes,
that's
with one
so
buddy,
safe.
you're on, you're on the streets, you're literally, yeah, and we don't even know the language, and you're watching the most yeah, I actually can't fully go back to those moments because it's
Yeah,
so in my brain.
absolutely.
Disgusting. But so he has that contact, and then he has the contact of YWAM San Jose, so Costa Rica. Maybe a few other. Oh, he had a contact, I think, in Venezuela because we were like, we could maybe hop on the plane or a bus and head that way. But we really had nothing. And so what we literally did is he called the base director, I think that day, or at least, or they already had plans for us to show up, or I don't know what it was, but we went and just got picked up. Oh yeah, we got picked up from YWAM San Jose. That's right. And they took us directly back to their base. And I just went from one bunk bed room with a bunch of women in Denver to another one at YWAM Costa Rica. And there was no plans for us or nothing for us to do. So I just on my tablet watched Netflix every day in my bed for the first week.
Whoa.
As just chilling, walking. I'd walk to the corner store and get ice cream. We sometimes have team meetings where we play some guitar and worship. we'd have to go to YWAM San Jose's worship, but we did nothing. I just like literally bought a vanilla Coke every day and an ice cream cone from the corner store, which cost me like $15 because plot twist, Costa Rica is so expensive. Um, and just,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where we slept. That's where we hung out. Um, I remember getting in trouble multiple times because YWAM San Jose was like, your students are using all of our Wi-Fi up. And I was
You're like,
like,
what am I
yeah, I
supposed to
don't,
do?
yeah, I'm like, I'm going to watch Grey's Anatomy, but thank you. So that's how it started. And yeah, and then it was like, okay, and that, yeah, that's why we started there because we wanted YWAM Costa Rica ran YWAM NIKO, which was a 5-day training program in the wilderness. And so our outreach leader was like, I had to do that when I was a student. So I'm making all you guys do that. And so we're going to do that. And so that was, so we stayed at YWAM Costa Rica, San Jose for that first week of our outreach. And then I think our second week of outreach was NIKO. And then we came back, I think, for like 2 or 3 weeks to YWAM San Jose. And again, just chilled around doing pretty much nothing except for like, I don't know, me being traumatized,
Yeah.
dissociating, going for walks, sobbing, trying to convince myself to stay alive and stay on the earth, um, and
Oh,
not really doing anything. Sometimes we would
yeah.
go out for what we would call evangelism, or we'd go to the red light district. And then, yeah, we did a lot of other random things during YWAM. During our outreach, like a few different, stayed in this like place in the middle of the wilderness for a little bit, felt like, and then we'd come out of the bush and just go like drop off Bibles to front steps, like Jehovah Witnesses.
Wow. Yeah.
And no jokes, you just come and like drop off a Bible at every front step. We didn't speak Spanish, we didn't do nothing. And then we would, oh, this is so funny. We called it Coke Ministry. And so you'd go to the beach in, where were we at that point? On what side? I can't remember. But you would just go buy Coke with your own money and then you'd hand people Coke and ask them if they wanted to hear about God. Which,
Wow.
like, what even is that? So
At least you were
for
giving them
me,
a Coke. Our
yeah.
evangelizing was just to go into Walmart and tell people that God had a word for them and then
Oh,
tell them the word God had for them while they awkwardly try not to be rude
oh
and
my, we
ask
did have
you
to do
why
that
you're
shit
being
too.
so weird.
We had to
So at
fucking do
least
that on
your
the
people
streets
got
of
a Coke out
Denver.
of it.
Yeah, I'm like, you can drink this and dissociate at least while you're tasting Coke, and I'll
Yeah.
stand here and try to evangelize.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're well. Here's a good buffer for all of us.
Yep. Hey guys, just wanted to pop in really quick and let you know that there is an abrupt cut right here because this is where Amanda talks about her NIKO episode, and I want you guys to listen to that full experience in part two. So we're going right now from when she showed up to her outreach, and we're about to jump to her experience after NIKO and what it was like going back to her original base, going home, going through her healing journey. So if you're like, wait, it feels like we're missing something here, it's because you are, and that is going to be in part two, which should be available at the same time as part one. Back to Amanda's story. So after NIKO, you still had to do a little bit of outreach, right?
Yeah,
And
like
then
5, 7 weeks still. Yeah,
7 weeks. Oh my gosh. And a lot of it was like a lot of nothing.
a lot of nothing.
Or
We did
did
about a
you?
week of like the anti-sex trafficking thing, and then we did about a week of the like Bibles on front steps in the beach town. Um,
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, literally a
Yeah.
lot of nothing.
And then do you go from outreach back to Denver and then back home? Is that how that
Yes.
works? Okay. You
So
like
I can't
debrief
remember what
from
the,
outreach.
yeah, it's called Debrief Week. And so you all show
Yeah.
up together and you have like one last week or a little more than like graduation. Um,
Mhm.
what's crazy is that like even when we got back to base, I will say that like YWAM staff, I remember to this day, and people talked about it because I've been talking to people from YWAM, they've said like, we've never seen such a traumatized outreach team come back. They're like, everything about you guys was different. Like, it was like the most traumatized group had just come back to base. And because of that, it was well known that what happened to us, it was actually well discussed and talked about that what happened to us was not okay and that like something's wrong here. So much so that
Yeah.
I was positive that no YWAM Denver team would ever do NIKO again. Like I thought for
Right.
like that's how bad it was. I was like, they'll never send someone there again. And to know that YWAM Denver is not going to send someone like that would mean it's really bad because YWAM
Yeah.
Denver is one of the most abusive bases in the world. It's known for that. So
Yeah.
I fully believed that we weren't going back and like no one was going back. That's why I think when
Right.
I found out that a YWAM Denver student had died about a month and a half ago, it,
Yeah, because it's like,
destroyed
how are
me.
they doing this? Yeah.
It was like, what in the world? And so, yeah, you go back to debrief week and we had a lot of drama actually on our outreach because our outreach was such a nightmare. And so there was all these other things. And in my opinion, now going back, there's nothing about us that was a nightmare on that outreach. We were just regular humans hanging out in Costa Rica. But because a
Yeah.
lot of us were regular humans that were starting to ask questions and be like, no, or what the fuck? No, or actually, no, I'm not doing that. We were labeled as
Mm-hmm.
this like really fucked up outreach. And so I remember us coming back and again, like we weren't allowed to talk about NIKO. So like everyone knew that we were fucked and everyone knew and we would say like, yeah, I have to do this program, but we couldn't talk about it. And so that was another just like really difficult piece. And in that week, it's all about like convincing you to come back, right? It's all about like, oh,
Yeah.
look at the work you're doing. Your work here is not done. You still like, this is only the first 5 months of your journey. You got to come back for phase 2, which is another shitload of money. And then once you do phase 2, then you can be on staff. And once you're on staff,
Right.
then you can't work anymore. Then you can't, you have to raise your own funds. You have to either like live on the base or be connected to the base. You can't have any of your own independent finances. Like, it's wild.
Yeah. You're
So
fully dependent.
yeah. And that's where it just, there it goes. Right. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So after your debrief week, did you then go home?
Yeah. I went home. And that was really hard. So I went home. By the time I was leaving YWAM, I was not really religious anymore. NIKO was
Yeah.
the breaking point for me of like, I don't really know what I believe, but none of this makes sense anymore. And
Yeah.
so going home was the most dark thing of my life because I had just gone to this gap year program that's supposed to change my life and like skyrocket me into, big Christian, incredible Joe at home. And all these people had paid money and sent money for me to go. And now I'm coming home, not a Christian, can't tell anyone, have to pretend I'm
Mm-hmm.
still a Christian, go back to working at a church, go back to like leading worship at a church,
Wow.
going back to telling people my
Wow.
YWAM story in a way that will make them happy and proud because they donated to me and gave up their
Yeah.
money and the church tithed money to me to be there. And so, and being like, okay, most of my friends are probably going back. Everyone's going back. I don't want to go back, but I have no life here, but I can't go back there because the whole time I was there, I was doing everything to make sure I wouldn't unalive myself. And so obviously that's not a
Right.
safe place, but I don't know what else to do. Also, I know I'm disobeying God because God must be real still. I just can't believe him anymore. So
Wow.
that was a big thing too. One of like my best friend still to this day went back for quite a few years. Um, my other really good friend that was an outreach with me, I think she just got out maybe 3 years ago, but was in for
Wow.
forever. Lots of my community went back. And that was really isolating as well. Because now not only did I
Mhm.
not have a community here anymore, because I wasn't religious, but I was still trying to pretend to be and still trying to engage, but I couldn't fit in this community here. So dark. But I didn't belong to the YWAM community anymore either. Right? They don't care about you once you're gone. You're not a part of their community. They're not talking to you on a regular basis. You can't just go visit and hang out. It's not like that. And so then it became this like this and them piece, but I didn't fit in with the them of my community that was the them. And I couldn't fit into the this, which was YWAM Denver. And so, and all I wanted was to be a good Christian kid. Like
Yeah.
it's like in my letter I wrote to myself, they made us write a letter at the very end of NIKO before we leave. And so I wrote, actually, it's like so sad because I'll leave it off this one. But I said, God loves me and he's still crazy proud of me. I actually don't think he was happy to see me struggle this entire time. I don't actually think NIKO does define God. He must be bigger than that. And so let me leave you with these thoughts, Amanda. Remember, Amanda, you're loved. You are still a good leader. You will continue to overcome trials, and valleys are indeed only temporary. And so that's like the handwriting of my 18-year-old self.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just like, I was hanging on so hard to like, this must not be God. God must be something else. But like, what is he? And I can't believe in him. And why isn't he saving me? And those last lines, right? Like, remember you're loved. You're a good leader. You can overcome trials, and valleys are only temporary. It was like my last like little love note to Amanda of being like, hang on, we'll figure this out. And I
Yeah.
was that kid who wanted to do anything. I wanted to figure it out. I wanted to love God. I wanted to know why that made sense. I was convinced that
Yeah.
I was a horrible human. And the reason that I didn't like YWAM was because I was a human that was sinning and was disobedient against authority. And that's what they told me every single day. They said, you have an authority issue. You have an issue with authority. You have an issue with authority. You're sinning. You need to like trust in authority. You're sinning. You need to like, God's given you like authority over you. He's put leadership over you to have authority. You have to have authority. And so there's so many letters that I found of me just begging God and being like, I'm trying to listen to you. I trust you. I love you. You do have authority, but something's not right. Or me begging God, like,
Yeah.
I promise I will listen to you if you stop making me throw up. I promise. Like, and so I lived in that world for about a year after YWAM, trying
Yeah.
everything, going to pastors, getting pastoral care from people, seeing Christian counselors, doing like Christian spiritual trauma courses, anything to bring me back to that place. But I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't, and I still can't. Yeah.
There's a lot of that I resonate with. My husband and I talk
Yeah.
about that a lot of like just how weird it is that to like not believe anymore when you were so like you were so all in. Like you did believe so much.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing to go through to be like, how do I get that back? Or like, will that come back?
Or
And then
what
it just
was
like,
that, right?
yeah.
I feel like for you in that process, do you connect to like a lot of grief in that and a lot of like sorrow about losing those pieces?
Yeah. So my husband and I deconstructed kind of starting in 2018. So over the
Okay.
last like 5 years.
Yeah, right around my
And
time.
yeah. And like we let go of it fairly easily. Like we didn't try
Mm-hmm.
really hard to hold on to it.
Mm.
Just because there was very different trauma. So it was easy to let go of. And it was more like towards the middle. We were like, cool, this deconstruction thing has been great. Also, like it also feels really weird and jarring not to have that belief anymore. So like,
Yeah.
will we ever get that back? And like we miss certain parts of it. And like, is that normal?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, so, and it still hits me and it does feel like grief. Like every once in a while still, um, when I hear people talk about like even in a non-religious way, in just a spiritual way, connecting to God or connecting to Christ, I'm like, wow, that must be nice.
Yeah.
Don't have that.
Like,
Can't feel it anymore.
no, I don't
That's
know where it
gone.
is. It's,
Yeah.
yeah. Or like every time I try to connect to it, I actually connect to terror in my body. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that sometimes what the world doesn't understand, like those that are not deconstructed don't always understand about those of us who deconstructed, is that none of it was a choice. It was
Mhm.
none of us chose to get there, right? Like I crave the not like the naive Joe brain from the early days that just went with everything and was like, oh, yeah, worship leading, do this. Oh my God, I'm hearing from the Lord. Oh, they encourage it. Like I want that back so bad. I didn't choose for it to go, but I had to then
Yeah.
reorientate my life with the new information I had. And so I think
Yeah.
that's also jarring for people, and people don't always notice that either, is that like it's also one of these processes that we don't have a lot of consent or control over. We start to have new information coming in or new experiences, and like 1 + 2 doesn't equal 3 anymore for some reason, and we don't know why. And so we have to figure it out. And so I think, yeah, that's the grief too. I think for me, I miss ritual. Like I miss the community aspect. I miss the blind hope that I used to have.
That is something that I've had to reconcile with too, is like
Yeah.
the just endless hope that was always
Yeah.
there. And it was very blind and very naive, but it was always there. And so
Yeah.
like not having that, it's weird. It's very odd navigating the
And
world
yet the
with that.
dichotomy, yeah, the
Yeah,
dichotomy of the blind hope, because at the same time, the hope was not really hope because it was like,
it wasn't real.
it didn't exist
It
actually
wasn't
ever.
real.
And
Yeah,
so maybe that's the pain too we sit with now, right? We believed in all hope for something that wasn't real. And I think, I don't know, I too, in that, like, that's why I don't like this us versus them. Like, oh, I want everyone to bring everyone to the deconstructive side. Everyone toss out your
yeah,
faith.
yeah.
No, it like, I am
I think
so
it can be
deeply
really
wounded that
harmful for people to deconstruct sometimes, especially
yeah,
if
and
they're not like in the space to want to do it.
it needs to be in your timing, and it needs to like,
Mhm.
and we can still connect to spiritual like places or
Yeah.
rituals or communities without doing harm. We don't really
Yeah.
know how as a society yet for some reason, but I
Right.
believe it can happen. And so I'm not
Yeah.
saying burn down every single church. Like I'm not saying like I hate every single person in the world who still loves Jesus and is a part of YWAM. No, I'm not. But I'm actually saying if your experience in these places are so beautiful, so holy, so edifying, so wonderful, then it should not be threatening for you to hear stories of when it wasn't. Because you should
Yeah.
be so secure in the ways that you continue to show up that these stories aren't threatening. And so I think that's the other piece too. It's saying to people, if you enjoy YWAM, if you are connected and that's a safe community for you, okay, that's okay.
Mhm.
But if
Yep.
you are not willing to listen to the people who are telling you that their stories in those same places were harmful and awful, and you can't look at that, that's the problem. That's the
Mhm.
problem for me. It's not a problem that people still want to continue to lead Bible schools. That's not the problem. It's that harm is happening, massive harm. And people's responses to it are, well, that didn't happen to me.
Right.
And that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and that response is really invalidating. And I get
Oh,
that. I get that on nearly all of my YWAM content. I get, wow, well, that never happened to me. That must have been a very one-off experience. And I'm like, cool. The tens, 20s, like probably hundreds of stories I've heard at this point, you're right. One-off stories, because that makes
yeah.
sense. Like it's really
It's,
invalidating. And it's like
yeah,
I honor you that you feel like you had a great experience. Whether it truly was a great experience or it's something you haven't unpacked yet, that's not for me to decide.
totally.
Like,
Exactly.
yeah, and like that will be your journey and that will be something you go through. But your good experience shouldn't come at the cost of all these absolute
Yeah.
traumatic, horrible things.
Yes. Yes. It's, I think that's the big piece, right? I love that you acknowledge that. I think like I didn't teach for long, but for 1 year, I was a grade 1 teacher. And I always use this analogy in the sense of like, if a grade 1 kid came up to my desk and said, Mr. Wall, I am being like horrifically bullied in your class. It would not be appropriate for me to say to that kid, well, I'm not being bullied in this class, so obviously you're fine.
Yeah.
No. What I would do, I'd get down to that kid's level. I'd look them in the eyes and I'd say, oh my word, the fact that you are being harmed in a place that I felt was safe is devastating for me. Can you
Mhm.
tell me more? Can you tell me how I can fix this classroom so it is safe for you? Can you tell me about the people that are harming you and why it's harming you so I can make sure it stops? Can you, if I'm not willing to listen to you and I am not the safe person, is it okay if I can get you to talk to a school counselor that might be able to support you better, right? That's how I respond to a grade one student, even though I'm not being bullied in my own grade one classroom. And the fact
Right.
that I'm not being bullied in that classroom, though, does not mean that my kid is safe, right? That's my
Right.
student. And so same thing in a YWAM place. It's like, or a church space. You're
Mm-hmm.
right. And also, why are you not being wounded? If someone else is being wounded in those places or harmed, is there a hierarchical power structure that is making it so you actually aren't experiencing the wounding? So are we
Yeah.
looking at that? Because if I'm a teacher in a grade one classroom, you're right. Grade one kids are not going to bully me. It doesn't happen. I'm the
Right.
teacher, right? So there's a hierarchical power here, a power dynamic of
Yep.
safety for me. And so my question should also be, what power do I have that means I am currently like not being wounded? And so what privilege do I have that puts me in a place of safety over you? And why is that? So let's also look into that, right? But that's not happening in YWAM spaces. That's not happening
No.
in many church spaces either. And
Yeah.
that's what makes me not trust in them, is that they can't listen. They will not listen. They will not tell the honest story of how that child died in August. They will not tell people what happened in NIKO, right? And that's where the red flags come up, not the religious piece.
I fully agree. So you came home, you deconstructed. Can you tell us just a little bit before you go about what your healing journey has looked like? I think it's
Totally.
important to like end on a,
Yeah,
you know, there is hope
totally.
after.
Yeah, I think, and I actually like, so for me in my life, there's two big things that are important. One piece of importance is acknowledging and sitting and feeling the trauma and the hardship and the emotions of what happened and leaning into that. And then the other aspect is transforming and growing and changing and moving forward and creating new narratives. And so my life involves both. And so as I shift into some positive pieces and some shifts and changes in my healing, I want listeners to know that the stage where you're at, where you're still weeping on your floor and throwing up, that was still where I was at like a month ago with this NIKO story. And so that's okay for you. You're allowed to be there. And there's also movement and transformation and growth. And so for me, yeah, my healing journey, I started going to therapy 6 months after YWAM, when I started actually having some of the worst night terrors of my life. Um, and started being like, this is kind of weird. Also at that time didn't know what scrupulosity was, or what. I only thought that OCD was contamination OCD or repetitive behaviors. And so I didn't know that at the time, but now realize that I had scrupulosity, which is like, yeah, religious OCD. And so terror around doing wrong or yeah, anything like that. And then started developing or started to have really insane intrusive thought, OCD, but around spiritual things or other things or trauma and things like that. And so
Mhm.
started not being very well, but couldn't figure it out. And also was like, I'm sick because I'm not believing in God and not trusting in God. So still had that YWAM mentality of mental health actually that I couldn't shift. It was just continually like, okay. And me continually searching for like, what am I doing wrong? What's so wrong with me? What can I get rid of to finally be better? This was a really dark 4 years. And I will acknowledge that. I went to a private university. And there's some really dark things that happened in that journey. But yeah, I started to deconstruct. I started to ask questions. I started to find community that didn't think the same as my Christian community did. Um, and then moved back from Edmonton. That's where I went to school. So different part of Canada, came back to my hometown. And that was a big transition for me, because I was really, I come from YWAM, where I came back not a Christian, but lying that I still was a Christian and masking hyper, right? Then went over to do school for 3 years in a different province where I fully almost pretty much deconstructed, but was a different human there and still completely different than my YWAM self and my home self. And then came back home after those school years and was like, what am I? Who am I? My only community is still Christian people here in Abbotsford, but I'm not even remotely like that anymore. I can't even like walk into my church anymore, let alone like be a part of that community. Um, COVID had happened in there too. Like COVID was happening somewhere in there too, and some of these stuff. And so I started finally actually seeing a counselor, in the Lower Mainland here where I am, and started really working on some of this trauma stuff. started really doing experiential trauma work, which means like actually like bottom up processing, working with our nervous system, feeling things, started finding healthy, beautiful community that had deconstructed like me and had similar woundings from me. So I could actually share my story and be affirmed and validated. Um, started like finally admitted to myself that although I was throwing up because I was anxious at YWAM, that it did develop into a full-fledged eating disorder and that I was really sick. And so started to acknowledge that and get help for that. Um, and then actually a lot of my healing journey has come from um, like, I think a lot of it has been reclaiming my story. So starting to find safety to tell my story, because what YWAM took away from me and the Christian church took away from me is they labeled everything as gossip, everything as sin. Talking negatively about anything was like, you're a horrible person. Everything you had to do had to edify this, like lift up the spirit. Right. And so if you weren't doing that, you were sinning. And so I slowly but surely started to tell my story in spaces that were safe. And then as I started doing that, actually got connected a little bit into the therapeutic world with psychedelics. And so I actually had 3 sessions of ketamine assisted therapy, legal ketamine assisted therapy in the Fraser Valley. One of which I went back to being in NIKO. And that's where I went in my trip, my psychedelic healing trip. And that's when I realized, holy shit, like this is next level. And really the veil was torn from me actually in that moment. And then again, I couldn't integrate it. That was about almost 2 years ago now. And so I went back there on a trip, and then my therapist was like, okay, we're ready to work with this. And I said, absolutely not. And so I pushed that away. And then here we are, obviously. The big push actually for me in sitting with this was the passing of that individual. But I then, went to school. I got my master's in counseling psychology, and started working with individuals as well in the past year, a lot of whom have spiritual trauma similar to my own and to my own story, similar to even like the Christian Reformed church I grew up in. And there's not a lot of places where you are understood within massive spiritual trauma, actually, unfortunately, and where you're fully safe in that. And there's not a lot of safe places where you can show up with your spiritual trauma while still wanting to stay connected to the spiritual like communities that traumatized you. And I think that's a lot too. You can go to trauma therapy and there's like counselors who did not grow up in the Christian church who are like, run, what the fuck are you doing? And it's kind of judgmental and harmful. And like, you can never be a Christian again. And that's not the answer, I don't think. No one pressured me to give up my faith or come back to it. I got to choose what stayed or didn't. And so that's been really beautiful. Working with others, working with myself, healing from trauma. And I think just like the biggest, most freeing thing, which as I say out loud, I'm like, oh, anyone listening to this at my home church later is going to be like cowering, but like, I don't know what I fucking believe in. And that's the best fucking freedom in the entire world. Like, I love that. And it changes all the time. Like, it's like, I don't know if I believe in a divine or not. I don't know if I'm agnostic or if I am maybe an atheist tomorrow. I don't know if I think there's still mystic things that happen, because some things, I don't know, I've done psychedelics. I'm just going to say it feels like there's pretty spiritual mystic things happening.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But I don't know. And that's the best part, because I don't think I am burning in hell for eternity or going to be trapped in a gold universe for life based on a choice I make. And so I get that freedom. And after living with scrupulosity for so long, I still live with OCD, obviously, but like, to be honest, like to walk into a gas station and go pee and to not pick up a piece of toilet paper on the small corner or to wipe the entire counter down, because I feel like if I don't, I'm sinning because I'm not gifting of my gifts when I'm peeing in a restroom. Like the fact that I don't do that anymore and I can actually just go pee and walk out to my car and drive away, it's the most biggest freedom of my life, right? Where typically if I didn't pick up that piece of garbage, I would be at home. I wouldn't sleep for 24 hours. I would probably drive back to that Shell gas station the next day to ensure that that piece of garbage isn't there. so that I would pick it up because otherwise I'm sinning. Right. And like none of that exists anymore. When I turn on the radio and there's a secular song on, I don't instantly pull over onto the side of the road to pray and ask Jesus to forgive my sins for listening to secular music. Instead, I fricking like churn up Maddie Zom as loud as I fricking want and stream
Love
Fat Funny
her.
Friend. Right? Yeah. And I
Yes.
get freedom. And I
Yeah.
skinny dip in lakes when I want to because my body belongs to me. And if a random
Yeah.
man on a hike sees my naked body in the water, that is not a sin on his part or my part. And so I'm going to do it. And so it's, yeah, it's just
I love
been,
that
there
so
is
much.
so much more hope. And it's real hope, actually. It's not the hope that they lied to me about. So,
Yes. I love, thank you
yeah.
so much for sharing that with us and sharing your full story. And I love that you talk about how, like, your healing journey wasn't super linear. There were times you had to put a pause on things and times that you had to do different things. And it's
Oh,
always a
yeah.
thing. And I'm sure you would agree, like, you're still healing. You're still going through
Oh,
this. Your story's even part of that.
I see
And
my therapist tomorrow to talk about NIKO.
yeah.
So, yeah, still healing.
Yes. Which is so good and healthy that you can, set that up for yourself and come and do this and then see your therapist tomorrow. And I just really appreciate you. I'm really happy that you're at a place where you can share your story. I'm really happy that this is part of your healing journey and something that you wanted so deeply to do for yourself and for the other people that it may help. And I just want to honor you in that and say thank you and tell you that I can't wait till we can do this again and talk about like the therapy side of things because you're also
Totally.
a therapist and you have experience in this and you help your clients through this. And that's like another important conversation. So
Yeah.
I so appreciate you. I'm so glad we connected. Thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And I cannot wait till we do this again.
Oh, I just like, again, thank you. Right? Like, there are not many safe spaces to tell stories like this, to even venture into like, the wilderness of this darkness. And the reason that people like me and people like you can venture into the wilderness of such darkness is because there are people like you that hold our hand and say, I'm with you as we go here. And so I just want to thank you for that. It's a lot of mental energy to sit and hear people's stories. Like for the past hour and a half, I did most of the talking and you did most of the listening. And you safely created a space for me to share a story. And that is a gift and a skill that a lot of people don't have, is even the capacity to create safe spaces for humans. So I just want to say thank you. And I expected to be freaking out this entire time. I actually have what's right over there? I have my little Ativan. I have a lorazepam Ativan prescription because sometimes I have really bad panic attacks. And so I had it in here because I thought, oh dear Joe, who knows where this is going to go? Like we think that Cassie's safe, but what if we get on here, we start panicking? And my system just really got to go with you. And it felt like I got to take you on a little bit of my journey, and it felt safer because I took you with. So thank you for that.
Thanks so
and I think too, I hope that listeners can imagine maybe me or you with them as they are listening to my story and remembering maybe some of their stories. And so I just want to acknowledge that too for listeners, that if as you listen, if this feels triggering or brings you into a place in your body where you're remembering big things, you can imagine both me and Cassie coming along with you. We can hold your hands. We can explore that wilderness with you, imaginally as you're listening.
Absolutely.
And also, no one has to listen either. We get to hold boundaries for ourselves of what feels best for our brains to hear and what doesn't. So, but so thankful for you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn off the recording, but we can still. Okay, guys, that's it for part 1. Amanda's story from start to finish, minus her NIKO experience. Please be on the lookout for part 2. I'm hoping to have these posted at the same time, so you should be able to see it either on the podcast, No Culty Vibes, or on No Culty Vibes on YouTube. As always, you can find me on Instagram at the.cassiemarie and on TikTok at the.cassiemarie as well. I would love to hear what you thought of the episode and Amanda's journey. And if you guys could comment some places and give Amanda so much support. I know it takes so much for her to be able to share this with all of you. And I want her to feel loved and supported by all of us as she is reclaiming her story and being able to share it with the world. So thank you guys so much again, and we will see you in part 2.